Hello and welcome back to CFO Live. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with CFO Magazine. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our presenter for today. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsor's virtual booth at any time during today's event and for the following week. Sponsor booths are accessible from the main page for this event. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A box on your screen. And now I am thrilled to introduce Lee Coulter, Chief Executive Officer, transformAI. We are pleased to have Lee with us for his presentation titled The Changing Landscape in Audit and Control, Intelligent Automation and the World of 100% Sample Auditing. Welcome, Lee, and over to you.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining today. A little bit about me. I've been in the world of service delivery operations and technology for the last 30 years, and have been very active in the world of intelligent automation. I'm the chair for the IEEE Standards Working Group for Intelligent Process Automation, and have been observing this space since 2012. And today, we're going to talk about audit and control and how intelligent automation is radically transforming audit and control. So I'm going to take just a quick walk down history lane and talk about some of the predictions that people have been making for the last 10 years, and then really look at what's out, what's in, and what is technology bringing us, and how does that materially change the way we approach control in an enterprise. And then finally, we'll talk about what it means for your audit staff, what it means for your expectations for your external auditors, and what it means at the audit committee level. This is this topic and the move to highly sophisticated auditing is something that's actually making its way into the audit committee agenda. So the first question I always like to frame is, what are controls for? And in my various roles with GE, Kraft, Ascension, transformAI, I have had a ridiculously high quantity of interaction with auditors, both internal and external. And so just as a level set, just to remind everybody, controls are to protect investors in capital markets, and specifically, and I'm not going to drain the slides as we go through, but minimize risk, protect assets, ensure accuracy, promote efficiency, and drive compliance. And we do that with predominantly three kinds of controls. And of course, audit is there to make sure that the controls are working and actually they are protecting investors in the capital markets. So if we look at the last 30 years in the world of audit, the principles of audit have been kind of nailed to the wall. They're pretty solid, and they really haven't changed much. And we'll take a look at some of the frameworks around this. But what is really changing in the last 30 years is the activity of audit and the activity of control is rapidly changing. This is going through a period of intense disruption, and we'll talk more about that and how you bring that into your environment. So over the last 30 years, audit activity has been in the rearview mirror, right? We're not looking through the windshield or even out the side view mirror. I mean, we're really looking in the windshield. And a lot of the things that audit and control discovers are, that horse has long left the barn. Right. And we're correcting for findings in future financial periods to avoid restatements and lots of unpleasantness. And somehow we switched the slide there. So also the sample testing notion of, grabbing 3 or 5 or 75 or whatever the number of samples is when you might have millions of transactions that are actually in need of some level of scrutiny. And of course, very, very manual over the last 30 years. And that is changing. And taking only structured data into the world of audit, now we're able to take emails and phone calls and Slack and Teams messages and files, saved on Box or in other SharePoint locations, and we're able to use unstructured data tools to now add context to the transactions that may be under scrutiny. So this chart is an interesting one. So the world of intelligent automation really kind of broke on the scene around 2014, 2015, and some of the leading firms, the big five, big four, big six, whatever you want to call them, we're also very early in on the intelligent automation space. And in 2015, Audit 2020 was published, which is the graphic on the left here. It talks about the change that's coming to audit and control, and 58% said it would be technology. There's a new version out from Forbes, Audit 2025. I included the link here, and would encourage folks to go take a look at it. And we've also moved into risk-based auditing, which is another major change for audit, and works very, very well as we also bring technological change into our control environment and risk framework. COSO, the Council of Sponsoring Organizations. I'm sure everybody on the phone here or online with me is familiar with COSO and the 17 principles of COSO. And COSO was formed in 1985, if you can believe it. And it took them 8 years to 8 years to get their first COSO standard framework produced. And since that time, it's been pretty enduring. And most recently, it was updated in 2013. In the framework, there have been some updates coming from COSO, but interestingly, they're not really updates to the framework. And I put a green box and a red box in terms of things that are changing. Our control environment's not changing terribly much. Our risk assessment thing is for anybody who's in the accounting world or the control world or the audit world or the risk management world, you know that we have literally an alphabet soup of new standards, SOC 1 and 2, IASB, NIST, CCU, which is the cybercrimes, universal. We have new ISA standards, the standards that are coming out to keep pace with the fact that we're now a global community, that we now have global accounting standards, that we now have a different view of technology in an enterprise, and we have money laundering, and we have compliance with who we're allowed to do business with and who we're not, and of course compliance in our supply chain to make sure that we're not using a vendor that's known to use child labor. And the examples go on and on and on. But my point is that the standards are really, there's a lot of stuff that is coming out and exercising influence over the compliance and control framework that we all need to have. So in research, Visio is out. We're not doing Visio anymore. We're using process discovery tools. We're not sitting there with a camera and a clipboard and making observations anymore. We're actually using process mining, where we're actually pulling information out of the enterprise application quilt to tell us what's really happening, how processes are really getting executed in the enterprise. In examination, we're not sampling anymore. We're taking a look at something called population. So we're moving from sampling to population, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. This notion of our audit reports and our findings, those are being phased out in favor of real-time monitoring, and we'll spend some time talking about that in more detail. And of course, the same thing goes with reconciliations, monthly, quarterly reconciliations. We're really talking about real-time and live active reconciliation that is being updated, on a real-time dashboard and scorecard, and it's changing the way we're approaching our accounting systems. And then finally, on the quality, the thoroughness of our audit. Sampling is out, and just everything being in and having KPIs for risk scoring across an entire host of KPIs, that is in. So I found some, I it's probably about 11 years ago, I asked one of the big four to tell me we had 41 regulatory agencies that exercised influence over the business I was working in. And I said, my organization spends a ridiculous amount of time, performing compliance activities, but then B, proving compliance activities. And then I had to spend money so that somebody else could say, yeah, this place did their compliance activities and can prove it. And I really asked for, what is really the cost of this? And so you can see some numbers here, which 0.3% of revenue is still a measurable net hit to the bottom line in an organization. And I think that this woefully underestimates the work of operations teams in the work that they do to perform compliance related activities. And of course, each of you can only answer this for yourself, but how effective is your current control framework? Well, just know that digital transformation for the audit and control environment can reduce those costs 20 to 40% and can demonstrably reduce the cost of external audit. We'll talk about external audit a little bit more as well. So this is one of the more important slides in my presentation today. And this is what has happened in the last 2 to 5 years. The advent and maturation of robotic process automation has allowed us to remove inaccuracies. We can perform processes across any number of systems of record or legacy systems. And this is super important. While automation is running, it is creating a record of exactly what it does. This record, this proof of what process got executed, what values, where did it come from, where did it go? This record is now, this is a never before available to the enterprise record of what is happening in the environment. And you can actually build processes in automation that generates proof of control activity and proof of control measurement. Data analytics and visualization, this is more last 24 months, but for those of you who engage with your external auditors, undoubtedly they have wanted to take you through their new tools where they say, instead of, we're going to take 1,250 samples from your ledger, they just say, you know what, give me all 11 million ledger entries for the last 12 months. And we're going to run that through our analytics tools, and we're going to tell you what we find. That is a fundamentally different thing to do. In this case, transactions or materiality levels would have eliminated whole populations of stuff that we would have no idea of whether or not there might be something unfortunate occurring in that area. It also gives us the ability to visualize data in new ways. And we'll talk a little bit about geographies, business units, individual people, and how we can visualize the data and our control environment in a very different way. And then finally, machine learning and cognitive computing. This is huge. I can't put enough underlines under that. Our ability to move into correlation and causation and to predict when something is likely to be a problem, whether it's likely to be money laundering, whether it's likely to be fraud, whether we find that there is some causation between a certain business unit and a group of leaders and some vendors and some customers with some activity. This sort of insight was never before available. And this is insights no human could possibly have been able to study. So let's talk about sources of failure, or control failure in this case. And I apologize for the busyness on this slide, but I really wanted to illustrate here that we have deterministic, this is, in the rear view mirror, task-based stuff. And that's kind of the high-level surface of the problem. We use RPA for that. We begin to get into intelligent automation, and we start to get at processes, systems, and procedures in the enterprise, and being able to give those a score and to transform those. But as most auditors will tell you, that the culture of compliance, the culture of control, and management's behavior and expectations drive an enormous amount of influence back up through the error chain, and are often found to be at issue. And what's really interesting about the new tools and new capabilities is we're now able to identify trends using heat maps and prediction data models, and look for areas where we might have management issues, or we might have a weakness in culture in a particular geography or business unit. This is a new level of understanding that really allows us to get really more at the heart of a source of control failure. So I mentioned a paradigm shift, moving from sampling to population. So, and I also said earlier that automated processes create that indelible record of what happened at every step. And that, if you sit down with somebody, even at the end of their workday, and ask them, they did 42 loan applications that day, and you ask them what they did on the 7th one in the 17th step, there's no way they're going to be able to tell you with any degree of certainty what really happened. But using automation, we have that indelible record that we can now examine and use that as sources of data for data models to identify correlation, to identify causation, and to look for trends. It provides a proof of compliance activity that has never before been able to be provided by an enterprise. So when we're now looking at everything, the whole population, we look at weaknesses in execution, weaknesses in process, systems issues. Is our accounting system up to snuff? And of course, issues correlated with groups of people. I mean, at the end of the day, most failures in control have a bad actor in them somewhere. And that's human misbehavior driving inaccuracies, whether intentional or unintentional. And that's really what we really are trying to ensure, is that we identify and prevent those and are notified as quickly as possible when those things start to happen. So this takes me to real-time monitoring. There is a kind of a natural flow as you look at the implementation of technology or digital transformation for control and audit. If I don't really like the term digital transformation, it's pretty overused at this point. But as you look at what we are now able to do with task automation, then intelligent automation, and then finally using all of the data that's created via the automation to populate data models, which allow us to be predictive and to look for and visualize in all new ways, it really changes the way we think about it. So you can kind of imagine, and one of the conversations in the space are control applications and audit applications, where people that are in charge of control, they literally have an app on their phone, and if something happens that's outside of certain boundaries, they get an alert. If there is a particularly suspicious transaction or sequence of activities that are believed to be consistent with bad behavior, those things can be identified in seconds, minutes, certainly in time to actually intercept the activity while it's going on and before it has completed. This is a game changer for anybody who is in a world in which fraud, or money laundering or other sorts of very, very serious financial risks exist. The ability to have an alert go off and to send people in to have a look at what's going on, to potentially interrupt that transaction, to interrupt those people, to stop money from moving. All of those things are just dramatically different when we're in a world of real-time or near real-time monitoring. Now, you can imagine that all of this is very significantly changing what an auditor needs to be. And I pulled this, you can see, this is from the AICPA. So this isn't something I just made up. But what I wanted to share is the fact that half of the skills that are being called for in auditors today, and certainly auditors in 2025, are altogether new. They're different than they have ever been. And you can see what they really are. Data extraction tools, data analytics backgrounds. This is really understanding data models, how they work, how to populate them, how to understand the output that comes from them, being able to potentially sit down and put fingers on keyboard and write some SQL queries, write some Python script. And these skills are part of the auditor of tomorrow. Technical and technological skills, I would add here. So understanding how systems interconnect and how we use those systems to perform the work of the enterprise, how interfaces work, how our security systems work, and a whole host of other things become really important to the new world of the auditor. So this is changing risk conversations. And it really comes down to a new program, a new paradigm in which high-risk processes are actually eliminated from your SOC 1 control scope. The vast majority of high-risk processes are high-risk because there are people in them. And unfortunately, as much as we love our people, people are prone to error. And segregation of duties is an imperfect science. And checking the checker is not always the most effective way to do it. So when we use task automation to literally remove the potential for human misbehavior, like I said, intentional or non-intentional, we actually can now lay out a plan. And I was successful in one of the organizations that I led this initiative for, that we actually removed over 40% of the SOC 1 control scope in 2 years using intelligent automation. We went from 51 controls to 30 controls, key controls in our SOC 1 scope in a little over 2 years. And that's a really meaningful change in terms of the scope of financial statement processing. Obviously, daily reporting and real-time monitoring and being able to look at, literally external auditors are now going to be able, if you run a global business, they're going to find behavior patterns, process patterns that exist in clusters around certain groups of people, certain business units, certain functions. And that's changing the risk conversation. And even looking at the culture of compliance and culture of control components. It's a new conversation to have. And finally, the ability to do simulation, process simulation, data simulation, and looking at processes before they go into effect. Change to the risk conversation. Finally, and I included here the source of this particular information, but I found it everywhere I looked. Technology in finance is on the audit committee's agenda, and it's just important that all finance organizations are in a position to have a solid conversation about the transformation of their control and audit environment, because I guarantee you, your external audit partner is talking to your audit committee members, telling them about their real-time monitoring services and all these new services and technologies that they now have available to them, and that you could be consuming internally. And so, for this reason, it's really important that everybody in finance or in the audit and control world become familiar with the fact that at the highest levels, things are going to change. Okay, that is the time where I need to move to Q&A, and looking forward to hearing what you have to ask.
Thank you so much, Lee, for that insightful presentation. It was pretty terrific, lots of great information there. As a reminder, audience members, you can enter questions into the Q&A box on the screen, and we're now going to review some of the questions that were submitted by the audience during the discussion. Lee, the first question that came in is, what does the future of intelligent automation look like? Are there any predictions you can make?
Absolutely. So intelligent automation, very similarly to the regular software landscape, is becoming more cohesive. There are single platforms that offer all forms of automation, including cognitive, predictive, and prescriptive automation, the ability to engage with unstructured data, natural language processing, real-time voice monitoring, and all of those in single platforms. So what we're seeing is the speed to deploy, ability to deploy, and completeness of capability, excuse me, is just dramatically different. And it's interesting, for all of the noise about intelligent automation, as we look at enterprises that have truly scaled enterprise or intelligent automation in their enterprise, it's in the single, or it's in the high double digit, low double digits. So 9, 10, 11% of the Global 2000 really truly has a scaled enterprise IA program. So I think we're going to see the early majority really begin to make this a mainstream conversation. And I think that it's going to create a whole new world of roles that never existed in our enterprise, and there's going to be a whole series of roles that were in the enterprise that will be dramatically transformed by working with automation.
Thank you, Lee. We have probably time for this one more question. How can control risks be eliminated, and why is this important?
So I'll give you a simple example. We use a procure-to-pay example, in which case you would never give a human being the ability to edit a purchase order, an invoice, and a voucher. But you may very well give that authority to automation, because under certain circumstances, that's a very valid thing to do. And you now have a record of what those criteria were and what exactly happened, and you'll be able to have a full population audit of that. If you look at all of your SOC 1, our analysis was that just over 90% of the SOC 1 control scope existed because of the potential for human error or human misbehavior. So as you look at each of those 40, 50, 60 key control processes and the operations processes behind them, you will find exactly where the people concern is. And in that, the application of automation, so that people are not subject to those risky steps, and that automation takes those risky steps with its full indelible, proof of what it did, and zero motivation to participate in any sort of bad act or behavior.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this session. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic session. Lee's presentation, along with all of today's sessions, will be available on demand. And our next session on Track 1 will begin shortly at 12:25 p.m. Eastern Time. There'll be a panel discussion titled The CFO's Crucial Role in Digital Transformation, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again, Lee.
Thank you all.